The Third Doctor and Joe Grant are sent on a mission to Solos by the Time Lords to deliver a mysterious box that they cannot open. When they arrive, they find themselves in the middle of conflict. The planet had been annexed by the human empire about 500 years ago, subjugating the native Solonians. However, as the human empire considers pulling away from Solos, returning freedom to the Solonians, the human marshal of Solos hatches a plan to guarantee himself control over the planet indefinitely, and in the process wipe out the native Solonians. At the same time, mutations are occurring in the Solonians. Can the Doctor thwart the Marshal's genocidal plans? And what is the mystery at the heart of this mutation? This is the setup for The Mutants, the penultimate serial of the 9th season of Doctor Who. This is a serial that, in common Whovian consensus, isn't much good. Boring is the epithet I believe is most staple to this one, and it's frequently seen as the nadir of season 9. But is this particularly fair? I don't think it is. In fact, I truly believe The Mutants has a lot going for it. Beyond its not even remotely subtle political commentary, which is pretty gripping in of itself, I consider it to be one of the better paced six-parters from the Pertwee era, and it's always a breeze for me to get through. Throw in some compelling direction from Christopher Barry, especially in the moody location shoots, and some great monster design, and you have a truly underrated serial of Doctor Who. Also, the worst of season 9? This is a season with the Time Monster in it. I think that's unfair. I do actually like the Time Monster.
But that's another story.
As I noted earlier, The Mutants is 6 episodes long, bringing its total runtime to about 2.5 hours. Six-parters are generally considered to be some of the weaker serials in Doctor Who, as the longer the serial goes on, the more the classic padding techniques begin to rear their heads. Capture and escape loops and things like that. And I won't pretend that The Mutants is completely innocent of these things, but for my money, the serial manages to escape a lot of these pitfalls simply because there really is a lot going on. Take the first episode, for example. Is it a bit on the slow side? If you reckon so, I really can't blame you. But it does have a lot to set up before we can even get into the main action. We need to set up the Doctor's reason for being on Solos in the first place, given that he's supposed to be Earthbound at this point in the series. We need to set up the occupation of Solos by the humans, and the friction between the Administrator's drive for pulling out and the Marshal's machinations for complete planetary control. We need to set up the friction between the Solonians themselves. Some of them are fighting tooth and nail for their independence, and some have taken a knee before their overlords. And of course, we need to set up the fact that the titular mutants exist. There are a lot of moving parts in this serial, so it stands to reason that the first episode is going to take its time setting all of that up. If you try to rush through any of this, the audience is going to get lost, and fast. The following episodes, however, move at a pretty decent clip. As I said, it has a few plot lines to cut between, so it's careful about that, but none of them ever really lag outside a prolonged sequence in episode 2 where Kai tries to fight off a group of mutants with a torch. It's honestly a lot better paced than The Sea Devils, the fan favorite from this season. Unlike a lot of serials this length, it never feels like it's repeating itself either. Every episode is introducing new information, pushing the narrative forward. This is something that some six-parters I love forget to do sometimes. I like Frontier in Space, but I also wouldn't blame you if you think the second episode of that one is wasting your time. And then, of course, there are the cliffhangers involved. It tends to be worth mentioning these when discussing the pacing of a classic serial, because if an episode ends on a bum note, the viewer is going to be a bit frustrated. But for the most part, this serial knows when to end an episode. There is some very bad cliffhanger acting from Rick James at the end of episode 5.
The life Clesium will start flooding through there. We'll all be done for.
But they're not all like this. Episode 3 ends with the mines being bombarded with the Doctor and company inside. A possibly standard, oh no, the Doctor is in danger, whatever will we do cliffhanger, but an effective one nonetheless. But episode 4 has one of the best cliffhangers in the Pertwee era, I think. A blaster goes off on Skybase 1, puncturing a wall and threatening to blow Joe and several others into the vacuum of space. It's just genuinely good television and has a serious amount of danger to it. While we're pretty sure Joe's going to make it, you don't know about Stubbs and Cotton, who we've come to know across the past 4 episodes. It's just good stuff. As I said earlier, The Mutants is often accused of being boring. Now, if you're not a fan of six-parters, that's fair, but I can't see the serial as boring. In fact, it's pretty compelling, it's paced pretty well, but it also contains some of my favorite ideas in the show's history. Bob Baker and Dave Martin are, for the most part, writers who are kind of inconsistent on Doctor Who. However, for any lack of cohesion on execution in some of their scripts, see The Invisible Enemy, which tries to cram way too many ideas into a 4-parter to ever work, their conceptual work is never not interesting. Take The Three Doctors, for example. The idea of a scorned Time Lord scientist rotting away in an antimatter universe held together by the sheer force of his will is a fun concept. The aforementioned invisible enemy might be overstuffed, but a sentient virus is a fun idea too. Such is the case with the Mutants. While the concepts here are filtered through a political lens, one that we will come back to later, the actual conceptual work here is just cracking good science fiction. Take the planet of Solos, for example. As a setting, it really does feel pretty alien on paper. A planet that takes 2,000 years to orbit its sun and is therefore subject to seasons that are about 500 years long each and are extremely volatile. By the way, if you're wondering how this planet is supposed to be even remotely habitable with an orbit this weird, take MST3K's advice on that one.
Read to yourself, it's just the show. I should really just relax.
For life to exist on a planet this volatile, the native Solonians have evolved in a fascinating way. It's cyclical. Instead of slow changes over thousands or millions of years, as the seasons change, the Solonians mutate en masse, slowly adjusting themselves to the dramatic change in climate the planet is about to go through. This is a genuinely brilliant idea. It's scientific claptrap, but it's suitably out there and weird for Doctor Who. Furthermore, this central idea forms the key mystery to the serial. At the beginning, nobody knows why the Solonians are mutating. Over the 6th episode, the reason why is very organically teased out with the help of ancient tablets and the anthropologist Sondergaard. There's even a fun misdirect in how it's played out. It's assumed for the first half of the serial the mutations are the fault of the human empire's experiments with the Solonian atmosphere, only for it to turn out to be a natural process, albeit one that is upset by the presence of the Empire. I will come back to that one later because it's relevant to another point. Honestly, the whole treatment of the planet Solos is some of the most compelling science fiction Doctor Who has ever written. If there is one thing I love about the Pertwee era, it's that it knows when to put the bug-eyed monsters to the side and tease out some genuinely compelling sci-fi conceptual work. Sure, the mutants themselves are bug-eyed monsters until they hit their final form, at which point they look very silly, but the context surrounding them is new and different. I wish we'd see more of these swings at truly alien worlds more often in the modern run, really. And hell, these days we have the resources to make the planets actually look alien as opposed to taking a trip to a quarry again. I mean, I say that, but I actually really like the quarries in the serial. Directing this serial is veteran Doctor Who director Christopher Barry. Barry is one of the great directors in the classic run of Doctor Who, and had been there pretty much from the beginning. His first credit for the series is The Dead Planet in the first Dalek serial. After that, he'd go on to direct some other fan favorites, The Power of the Daleks, The Demons, and The Brain of Morbius. He also directed ignore that. The point is though, Barry is a very accomplished director. His contributions to Doctor Who are without fail moody and creepy, from the quiet tension of the Dead Skaro and the Dead Planets, to the full-on hammer horror pastiche of the Demons. So it should come as no surprise that Barry's moody touch is well on display in the Mutants. Now, for the studio-bound material, not so much. All the studio stuff is set in space stations and outposts, which are pretty cold and clinical. Outside of some fun lighting and an arboretum aboard the space station, Barry isn't doing anything flash with the taped studio work. But when the crew go on location, Barry's touch becomes immediately clear. Sure, Solos is yet another quarry for the most part, but Barry consistently shoots the landscape a touch underexposed and covered in smoke machines. The result is that Solos feels gloomy, almost desolate, a planet ravaged by the human empire. It's a beautiful tone to strike with the planet's surface, except for one shot right at the beginning that's a little hard to take seriously. However, Barry's direction for Solos isn't all doom and gloom. The location shoots in the caves are actually beautiful. The cliff faces are washed with red and green lights. It's a pretty stark contrast to the moody tone of the quarries outside, but it still feels very much of the same world. In fact, I think it was a deliberate choice. See, in this serial, the caves are a place of importance to the Solonians. The radioactive material in the walls aid the Solonians in their mutation, helping them to the next stage of their lives. So the caves being beautiful while the planet around them isn't so much makes a bit of a statement. While the planet has been largely stripped by the human empire, rendered grey and grim, this place that still belongs to them is alive, with colour and light. Was this deliberate? I don't know. Barry didn't actually care for the political bend of these scripts and just wanted to tell a sci-fi story by some accounts, so it's far more likely that pretty lights equals radiation here. But hey, even if this wasn't intentional, it still works. Speaking of politics, now, this might escape some viewers' attention, but this serial is a little bit political. I know, shocking, it's so subtle with the messaging, it's impossible to detect. Yeah, just kidding, the serial's about as subtle as a brick to the head. We hate it when Doctor Who gets political, many people say. We want to go back to the old days. But in the old days we had the Mutants, which when it's not having fun with cool sci-fi concepts and moody location shoots, is a grim look at the effects of colonialism on indigenous peoples of the land. The segregation, the institutional violence, the destruction of their cultures. It's a remarkably progressive piece of television for 1972, and it mostly stands up pretty well to today's scrutiny. I say mostly because there is one major problem with its messaging I'll quickly get out of the way. Through this serial, we meet two security guards on Skybase who help the Doctor get the best of the Marshal's plans to massacre the Solonian natives. You'll notice one of them is black. This man gets a pretty significant screen time across the serial, and is in fact there till the very end. It's his friend who dies in action rather than he. It's pretty awesome to see a black character get this much screen time in 70s family television. There's just one problem. His name is Cotton. That's not great. Now, in the defense of everyone involved, this appears to be more an accident than anything else. Both Cotton and his mate Stubbs were written by Baker and Martin to be stereotypical Cockneys, and were imagined as white by the pair. However, in casting at some point, Christopher Barrett decided to cast a black man as Cotton. So this seems far less intentional, leaving it more as just rather unfortunate than anything malicious. However, this serial is progressive and political in more ways than representation and casting. Baker and Martin have stated that they took inspiration from South African apartheid for the setting of Solos, wanting to strike at the horrible practice. This is immediately clear from the first episode. The native Solonians are treated as second-class citizens, whose opinions are only superficially listened to by the humans, and are forced to use separate teleport pods from their overlords, and are required to go through a humiliating decontamination procedure anytime they come aboard Skybase, something no human is ever seen to have to do. The Doctor actively points the separate teleport pods out as segregation, by the way. They're not vague about it either. He says that word with all the disgust Pertwee can muster.
Segregation.
Incidentally, anytime the Doctor uses a teleport pod in the serial, he makes a point of using the Solonian one rather than the Overlord one, as a subtle screw you to the segregated system. It's pretty awesome. Both totally in character for the Doctor, and a powerful piece of writing on Baker and Martin's part. However, the allusions to apartheid are but a part of what makes the serial so compelling from a political standpoint. It's not specific to just the apartheid in South Africa. The messaging can be found to apply to all colonialism as a practice. The key mechanism at the center of this serial is that the Solonians mutate every 500 years to adapt to drastic changes in environment caused by the frankly bizarre orbit Solos takes around its sun. However, the human occupation of Solos has taken up the entirety of their spring. For the past 500 years, they have been under the rule of the overlords. The human empire had installed their values and beliefs on Solos, crushing the culture and traditions of the Solonians to the point they can no longer read their own language. So, when the mutations begin, the Solonians are terrified. They don't know why this is happening to them, and the only documentation explaining their life cycle to them is written in a murdered language. The Solonians have been so violently assimilated that they no longer understand themselves. It's a sobering statement that to colonize a world that is already populated is inherently to destroy the people living there, to assimilate them, to cut them off from their own heritage. It reminds me of the history I learned at high school in Canada about residential schools and the vicious acts of evil committed by the English colonizers in North America and Australia. Entire groups of people forcibly separated from their families, then forced to learn English and forget their own languages. It's an incredibly vicious act to display on family television, on the BBC no less. The depths of complete lack of subtlety in this serial are honestly impressive. The scientist on board Skybase who the Marshal tasks with building bombs that will terraform Solos at the expense of slaughtering the Solonians is German. Gosh, Bob and Dave. I wonder what you meant by this. The depiction of the human empire is also interesting in terms of the colonialism parable. One of the main running threads of the serial is that the empire is allowing Solos to emancipate, but not out of any kindness. Rather, the empire has run out of money, and they are pulling out. I can't help but wonder if that was a shot at the ruins of the British Empire. A once powerful empire now collapsing under its own weight and pulling out of their colonies because simply it's too much trouble to maintain them anymore. It wouldn't be the only time Doctor Who has had an analogy for this crumbling empire either. The Deadly Assassin uses Gallifrey to parody the ineffectual nature of the British government in the decay of the empire as well. The Mutants is a powerful piece of television, but it also represents something that's been lost in Doctor Who recently. It's often said that Doctor Who has always been a progressive show, but in recent years there's been a slide from the biting social commentary here towards non-committed centrism. Episodes like Kablam, or more recently the Interstellar Song Contest, attempt to tackle real-world issues, but fall short of definitively making a statement, instead settling for both sides commentary that at best seems spineless and at worst actively harmful. This is all the more disappointing when we have examples like The Mutants from the past. A serial that broadcast in 1972 is more progressive than an episode that broadcast in 2025. That's disappointing, but it works as an example to present for criticism. Doctor Who can and should go as hard politically as The Mutants, so we should hold it to that standard. Ask the show to do better because we know for a fact it can, because it has in the past. Dinging current Who for failing where the serial succeeds feels like a dour note to end on, so something a bit more positive. The Mutants is genuinely a favourite of mine now. When I rewatched it recently, I wasn't looking forward to it because I had little to no memory of it, but it really hooked me in with its science fiction concepts and its biting commentary. Yes, it is 6 parts and occasionally has some pacing issues attached to that. Yes, there are some rough performances in it, but all of this to me is part of the classic Doctor Who package. Alongside all of this is a genuinely compelling piece of television, one that grips me every time I watch it. So I say give The Mutants another chance. Next time you have 2.5 hours worth of spare time, chuck it on and approach it in its own spirit. Maybe you'll find something new to appreciate, or even to love as I do.